Thank you very much, Glenn, for the invitation. And yeah, first of all, maybe apologies to all of you. I look really a bit disturbing. I can tell you the story later over coffee. It had something to do with a car and a bicycle. But at the end, I still wanted to come here and discuss with you SCOAP3. So probably I step to the side and your attention is to the slides, so you don't have to look into my face. Voila, perfect. So let's do a little very brief SCOAP3 in one page, and then I go a bit into details. So what is SCOAP3? And I also want to thank Jeff, who even mentioned SCOAP3 in his keynote this morning as one of the examples. I'm really delighted that he did. SCOAP3 is a big collaborative effort of 3,000 libraries, and many of the South African libraries are part of that, to make particle physics publications in established journals open access. And we have members in 43 countries that all joined CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, in making that happen. And since 2014, with this initiative, we now made already almost 29,000 articles open access, which represents almost 90% of all particle physics publications these days. We have authors from more than 100 countries. So one of our paradigm is we don't want to exclude anybody. We pay for that centrally, but every author in the world can publish. So the authors don't need any money, don't need any relation with CERN or one of these libraries. Everybody who wants to publish in the journals is free to publish open access at no cost. And we have an average investment into the articles of around 1,100 euro, which nicely reflects also what Martin said before. That's a bit hard to read, but I come to this anyway later. One of the key outcomes that we now know after 5 years, not only that it can work and that it's sustainable, it also helps the authors a lot because the downloads, the access to their articles went up by a factor 2 to 3. I come a bit first to history. Why at the end did we do it at CERN for particle physics? Well, Jeff said this morning that open access basically has history of like 25 years. I'll probably go beyond. I said for particle physics at least, it started already in the 50s. Because in our discipline was extremely fast at that time. Authors started writing their papers, copying it physically and sending it physically to libraries all over the world to share their preprints because they wanted to get feedback from their colleagues on the other side of the planet. So this was a common practice, and if you come to CERN, you still see a big preprint archive, a physical archive with a long row of drawers. We have all these old papers from the 50s and 60s. At one point, one institute started collecting all that into a catalog, and in particular, that was here our friends at Stanford. They created a database to see what are actually all those preprints, because at one point, all the paper copies were a bit too much. And then if you wanted, you could receive from Stanford this preprint catalogs, so you know what is out there. Then they put it even in a big database so you could search it, but still it was like in the times, nobody really heard about internet at the time. Until this gentleman in 1989 at CERN created the World Wide Web, and CERN made it open, made it to the open domain, and then you know that it was a big success. That's how it all started, this paper of Tim Berners-Lee, who had the idea to make things open and to demonstrate that it's really working well. He teamed up with the guys at Slack at Stanford, said, okay, let's take your database, and we put it out to the physicists in the world. And now suddenly they had access to this catalog online. That database, Spires, was basically then the first database in the web, the first kind of really usable website in the US. And it's still run today by my team at CERN. We took over from Stanford, and now it's called Inspire. It's run at CERN. Then only 2 years later, there was another big step for preprints, and that came from this gentleman, who had the idea, why should we still have these preprints copied and sent around in physical paper? We allow people to upload it to a central database. And that was the start of Archive. So in 1991, on his personal machine, he started the Archive, which nowadays is the largest preprint repository in the world. And especially in our discipline, it's extremely popular. If you look in particle physics, basically 100% of all particle physics publications first go on the Archive before they go on publication. You see, that's about the ratio. And then few years later, in 2014, we finally started with SCOAP3. Now, you have to imagine, I just said before, we have about 100% of the particle physics publications in the preprint on arXiv anyway. So many people asked, so why do we even have to start a gold open access initiative with SCOAP3? Why not simply leaving it and we just ignore the journals that are behind the paywall? But there was a very strong demand from the scientists at CERN and from other institutes that said, no, we also need to have access to the final peer-reviewed version. We want to see what is the final publicized version and want to have access to that. We didn't have an access problem at the time for particle physics, but we still wanted to serve the community to provide both the green open access version on arXiv and the final version in the journal. So how does SCOAP3 now work? Just a quick overview of the business model. We have basically 4 involved parties, and that is also one of the key ideas of SCOAP3, bring all the parties at the same time at the table and develop together a business model so that we can develop something which is collaboratively and not against one or the other. So we have, on the one side, of course, the researchers that submit their articles to journals. They submit their articles to the existing journals that were already out there, some of them 100 years old. One of the key points that we realized quickly is we cannot force the researcher to go into a journal that we like. We have to open up the journals that they like. So we use the journals that are already there in particle physics and make them open access. For those journals, CERN, on behalf of SCOAP3, CERN is representing as a legal body this SCOAP3 initiative, entered into contracts with publishers all over the world, publishing those high energy physics, particle physics journals. And we told the publisher, okay, we pay for your publication. You have to make the article immediately open access. You have to use a CC BY license. And you have to give money back to the libraries, because now we pay you for the journal. We don't allow any double dipping. If we pay, let's say, 50% of the journal, you have to reduce your subscription fee by 50% and give this money to the libraries. And then that's how we finance the entire thing. We go to libraries and ask them, look, the publisher recently reduced the subscription fee by a certain amount. That's because we make the article centrally open. Please be so kind, give us your saving, give us the money that you received from the publisher and redirect it to SCOAP3 so that we can basically use the same money which was already there to give it to the publisher. So again, the same idea that we already heard that morning. There is the money already in the system. We just have now a different flow of money to make it article open access. Now, this works in most cases, but not in all cases, because obviously some libraries are very, very research intensive. They publish a lot. And then if you just look what their equivalent of the share would be, it's much more than they receive back in money. Typically, we ask most of the libraries to only give us what they save. That's why the money is not totally sufficient. We have about 75% of the gap. And this, luckily, is filled by funding agencies in countries. In many countries, like China, like the UK, large funding agencies centrally pay for SCOAP3 and provide what is missing. And then there's still something missing because also some countries currently do not participate in SCOAP3. And that's the money that CERN chips in, where the CERN management says it's in the DNA of CERN, it's in the responsibility of CERN to provide an infrastructure for particle physics. And they see this as part of the infrastructure, so CERN is committed to pay for the missing money. For South Africa, it's a bit simpler because there we don't need funding agencies to support. Thanks to Sunlink and thanks to its members, you support SCOAP3 exactly to the amount you need, even more because you stand as your savings. So thank you very much for that. But Glenn asked me I should talk a bit more today about what is actually the impact that SCOAP3 had. Now we run it since 2014, so 5.5 years later, we know a bit more how did it go. And I wanted to focus on the impact of the 3 main involved parties that I mentioned before, the publishers, the libraries, and the researchers. But I felt there's probably also another impact that's for the overall open access community. So I want to look at those 4. Let's start with the publishers and the libraries, because for them the impact is, I wouldn't say small, but relatively easy to explain. For the publishers, they have an interest to be in SCOAP3 because they have, at the end, they save money from being a part of it. They don't have to send individual invoices for APCs that they would do otherwise. They have just one central party they deal with, that's CERN. They have very consistent requirements. They don't have different funding agencies that have different open access requirements. We have a central, globally aligned model of article compliance. So they know exactly what we want, and they know exactly who pays for it. And they have a nice contractual stability. CERN is now into this since 2014. And we just recently signed, or we are about to sign contracts with the publishers for another 3-year cycle. So now 9 years in a row, we have SCOAP3 with the publishers that are part of it. For the libraries, there are even more advantages, I believe. One is, in most cases, as they only send us the money that they used to pay for subscriptions before anyway, they can support open access, you can support open access at no additional cost. Then the libraries are part of an international collaboration. I mentioned we have 3,000 libraries from 43 countries. So it is a big community, which also is a nice forum of exchange. We also regularly host meetings at CERN where the library community comes together. Unfortunately, Glenn only, I think, made it once so far. It's also a long flight, I know. But it's a great opportunity to exchange and to hear what is happening in the other countries and to learn from SCOAP3, but also from other initiatives. And then it's a very easy entry level if you want to support open access. If you're a small university, you don't have big funds, you don't have big teams, you can still support open access without the need of doing all the invoicing for APCs yourself, or doing the negotiation with publishers yourself, or doing article compliance checks yourself. This is all done centrally. You basically only have to send money which you already spent before, and then everything is taken care of centrally. So universities, libraries, especially smaller ones, like this as a good idea to start open access for them. And then also we have some technical abilities that we provide to our partners. Every library can directly harvest all these articles into their institutional repositories. So it's a nice way for them also to increase the number of articles in their institutional repositories. Now, looking at the research community, what does it mean for our physicists? And there, I think we should always look at both sides, the readers and the authors. Often in the open access discussion, it is focused on the authors because they have to pay then the typical APC model. But of course, we don't forget the key benefit that we want to achieve at the first place is giving access, immediate full open access to the readers so that they can read the final peer-reviewed version immediately after publication. And as we do not interfere with any of the operational processes, they can do this in the same way they did before. They can go on the publisher website if they like. They can go on their institutional repository if they wish. They can go to Google Scholar, whatever they want, whatever they used to do before. They receive the same way the article, but they can immediately access it. And as we have CC BY license, and we provide also all the full text XMLs, MathMLs, etc., what also Copernicus mentioned before, it's very easy then for authors to reuse the articles, to do text and data mining, etc. For the authors, I believe the biggest advantage is for them actually nothing changes except that their article is open and they retain the copyright. Because they go to the same journal they used to go before. They have the same editorial process that they have before. We don't interfere with anything of that. The change is they receive the article open access and they retain the copyright. They have no administration, no barriers at all. But they receive substantially higher visibility of their research. And that's a study that we did at CERN together with the two large publishers that participate in SCOAP3, Elsevier and Springer. They kindly gave us their log files. And then we did a study comparing the article downloads of their, in total 4 journals that are in SCOAP3, before they were in SCOAP3 and after they were in SCOAP3. And actually not really a surprise for us, but a nice confirmation that what we did made sense. The number of downloads, and that's, if you see on the scale, it's the download time of publication or at the end after publication. So on the x-axis, you see month after the publication. The red line is the publication date. And on the y-axis, you see the number of downloads. The number of downloads in all the 4 journals increased by a factor 3 to 4 from being closed to being open. Then we looked at another journal that was a bit lower. It's factor 2. That's why on the opening slide I said 2 to 3 to be a bit conservative. But I think overall we can say about 300% of increase in downloads for articles after they have been open. And then I said I also want to look at the impact for the open access community. And that's why I think SCOAP3, even though it wasn't really the initial idea behind, because we really wanted to work for the particle physics community, I think we did, or I hope we did, a favor for the overall open access movement, because I believe we established an open access model which we have proven it can work. It is sustainable. We now do it for 9 years in a row, considering the extension which is already agreed. We can see that this idea of flipping existing journals can work, and the overall money stream is sufficient to support it. And what is nice, we see now that the experience that we have after SCOAP3 started in 2014, or actually we even started with the discussions much earlier, we can use that to also advise other initiatives. We have a lot of open access initiatives that come then to SCOAP3 and ask, okay, how did you approach the libraries? How did you start the negotiations with the publishers? And we're very happy to share that and to try to help and see how we could maybe establish another model in another discipline. I don't want to go that far that I could say SCOAP3 is replicable to all disciplines. It's not. It was very unique in our discipline, also with the strong role of CERN as one central institution. But the experience we gain with that and the overall proof of the concept, I think, is very valuable. And many other initiatives, like for instance, also OA 2020, use that as an inspiration to embark on an even bigger idea. Now, let me also spend a moment on what does it exactly mean for you in South Africa. So we have researchers from 16 South African institutions that publish in the SCOAP3 journals. As I said, everybody is free to publish in the journals at no cost, open access. Now, I don't want to claim that this is a result of SCOAP3, but still something nice for the South African research community. Now, today you account in our discipline in particle physics for 0.3% of all publications worldwide, which is an increase of 300% over the past 10 years. You also increased substantially your scientific output in the discipline. Overall, as of yesterday, we supported 842 articles with South African authors. To a large extent, of course, these are articles resulting from big international collaborations. South African researchers working at CERN, at Fermilab, or other large experimental facilities are, of course, also included here. But 20% are articles from local South African theorists that work here locally and publish in the established journals. 14 SUN members contribute financially, again, thanks to you and to Glenn to make it happen. And Glenn represents South Africa and SUN in the governance, as we really want to ensure that we do what the community wants. We have a very international governance where all countries are represented, and all the decisions about the strategy are taken in this governance, and Glenn is part of that. Now, I mentioned it already, so I basically took went a bit ahead of myself. What's next? We have 3 more years to come. SCOAP3 always thinks in 3-year cycles. It has proven that this is something which is manageable for our library partners to commit to 3 years. And it's also something that the publishers like to have a 3-year contract. So we had the first phase, how we call it, that we contracted with publishers from 2014 to 16. Now we're currently in the middle of phase, or almost to the end of phase 2, which runs until the end of this year. And then from next year onwards, we already have concluded the negotiations and contracts are being signed for another 3 years of all the journals that we have now in SCOAP3. So we expect to open up another 23,000 articles over the next 3 years. Then we have 2 more priorities that we want to do. First of all, I mentioned at the beginning, CERN still puts some money in because not all countries are in. We have still some partner countries that we would like to join SCOAP3, in particular in Latin America, where we try to reach out to them and engage with them. I'm confident that we will succeed at the end. And something very interesting, which also reflects a bit or connects a bit with the discussion that we had in the very first talk this afternoon with Springer Nature. We now want to use this network that we have with SCOAP3 with 3,000 libraries and see what else could we maybe do. The mandate is still pretty much focused on the discipline of particle physics, but we don't have only journal articles, we also have monographs and textbooks. So maybe we can use this community to also open this up. It's a very brand new idea. We now have just established a working group where we try to develop a business model, how this can work. But that's hopefully then the next talk I can give to you on the next Sunday conference. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward for your questions.
Thank you, Alex. We'll take your questions at the end.